Welcome to the Tepper School of Business Multimedia Series. For more information on the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon, please visit us at www.tepper.cmu.edu/multimedia. And now, here's your selected video.
All right, and with that, I'd like to get started. So first off, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to the Mellon Series speakers today. My name is Sahaj Madhav, and it's my honor to be introducing David Simmons today, CEO of Pharmaceutical Product Development. A little bit about David Simmons. He was actually a CMU alum, where he graduated here with a mathematics degree as well as industrial management. From there, he actually became a software engineer for over 10 years before switching to pharmaceuticals. From there, he actually worked for 15 years at Pfizer, and most notably, he was the president and general manager of the emerging markets and established products unit business before moving into his current position as CEO of PPD. And with that, please join me in welcoming David Simmons.
Well, thank you, everyone. It is really a pleasure to be here. I grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia, not too far from here. Went to school here as an undergrad, so my whole first 22 years of life, I don't think I ever ventured more than a 2-hour drive from this area. So to go from those beginnings to what I'm doing now has really been a great blessing and a great privilege. So I'm going to shape this discussion, which I'll talk maybe 20 or 25 minutes, and then the rest will be question and answer. It's really intended to have looked back on my career since I left Carnegie and what lessons did I learn along the way that if I was you, I wish I knew when I was leaving Carnegie. I would have architected my career with more thought than maybe the luck that got me to where I am. So this is really all for you guys to try to look back on my career. What lessons did I learn and how might it be useful to you? Also, I'd say when I was a junior, I think this was 1985, I took a finance course as part of my industrial management double major, and Professor Damon was my teacher. And
you're dating me now.
Yeah, he treated me very badly, and it was we were joking this morning. There was a talk on a stochastic calculus course, and I remember an advanced data analysis course I had in the same semester. And someone was mentioning, wow, that sounds so difficult. And I said, well, I had both of those simultaneously, and the finance course was more difficult than the advanced data analysis course. But look, I mean, one of the reasons I can do what I do is because I'm not intimidated by any problem. No matter how complex it is, I'm comfortable breaking it down into constituent parts. I'm comfortable with analysis, and that kind of ability not to be intimidated but to tackle complexity and wrestle it to the ground was forged here at Carnegie Mellon. And a finance course was one part of that forging process. And I have a lot of gratitude for what I went through here. Hopefully I can give a little bit, get back. So let me tuck into this. So I'm going to go through just a brief introduction on the company I run now. And I was at Pfizer for 15 years. I've been at PPD for 2 years. It's a critical player in the drug innovation and development ecosystem. I'll explain a little bit about what we do, but it's not the purpose of my talk. The purpose of my talk is to go in and talk about lessons learned during my career progression, and then kind of turn it and say, if you were coming in and interviewing for a job at Pfizer or at PPD, and I'm interviewing you for a senior executive position, what am I looking for? Now, I think it's important that when you go in, if your tendency is to spend so much time figuring out how you're going to communicate who you are and express yourself, that's pretty good. That's a good step. But if that doesn't match what I'm looking for, you can be using up all the precious time you have with me and not hit the mark. So I'm going to try to give you the Rosetta Stone for how to interview with me, and each position has a unique set of criteria, but there's some common things I look for. I'll share those. And then I'll walk you through, okay, as you have the good fortune to progress your careers, you're all here at Carnegie, you're probably better positioned and have more intellectual horsepower than I had at your stage. So if I'm doing well, you guys ought to be able to do better. So many of you will be in the same position I've been in. So I'm going to walk you through a career decision I made, probably one of the biggest impact, one of the most difficult decisions I made, which was leaving Pfizer. I'm in a mode to compete for the CEO role of Pfizer in the horse race for that, and I choose to leave to be CEO of a private equity-owned company. Why? And how did I make the decision? So I'll walk through the framework of how I got to that decision, how I looked at it, and hopefully, if you have the good fortune to make these decisions, you can glean some lessons from that. And again, there'll be a Q&A at the end. So what is PPD? Pharmaceutical product development and the whole industry of clinical research organizations started about 30 years ago. There were two gentlemen who came out of biopharmaceutical companies, Dennis Gillings, who's a British leader, and Fred Eshelman, who was a North Carolina native, UNC, PhD in pharmacy, who Fred had been the leader behind the Zantac development program at GlaxoSmithKline. He left Glaxo, Dennis Gillings had left his company, and they started Quintiles and PPD. These are the two largest clinical research organizations, and they basically said large biopharma cannot run these processes effectively and efficiently enough. We'll go build an industry where we'll do a collective servicing of the entire industry and run drug development programs. So that's what the industry is. We run the clinical trials from the optimization of the drug protocol and consultancy on the protocol itself, through the selection of investigator sites or hospitals around the world, to contracting with those hospitals, to educating on the inclusion-exclusion criteria, teaching the investigating hospitals the clinical research forms and how we need them filled out, laying in the technology to do this electronically and through the new mobile technology that exists, and then making sure that the data is pure and all the statistical tables, listings, and files are put in a way that can support a dossier submission to regulators around the world, whether it's the FDA, EMEA, and others. So some of the numbers, we work with all of the top 50 biopharmaceutical companies. We run about 600 clinical trials at any one time. We have 13,500 people worldwide. The bulk of those people are monitors who visit the investigator sites and make sure that the clinical research forms and the data captured is of the highest quality with no errors. Also, biostatistics groups, there's a large percent of our population. We've won a lot of awards I'll share on the next slide. So this is a highly reputable, innovative company targeting a specific area of the drug innovation and development ecosystem. We're 84 offices in 46 countries, so we truly are a global workforce. About half of our population is in the US, about 3,500 are in Europe, and the rest are in Asia Pac. So it's quite a large enterprise. This slide I'll just blow through. This is kind of, okay, we're good at what we do, and we're recognized through external third parties. The one to point out that's probably most important, though, is that first one, that CenterWatch Global Site Survey. So the key to clinical research is at the hospital investigator site and the ability to recruit patients and do a quality job at deploying the clinical trial protocol. So the investigators who do that, the physicians who do that work, are asked to rate who would they rather work with than anyone else, and they pick PPD. We make it easier for them to do their jobs. We're the best ones to work with on that front, which over time really gives us a competitive advantage. So let me go through my journey, and then I'll get into the lessons I learned through this. So as was mentioned, I graduated here with, I don't know if they still have this, but it was called a double major. So if you were willing to overload a couple semesters and fill up your elective space, you could come out, in my case, with an applied math degree in operations research, and then have an industrial management or a business component major tucked along with it, and get all that done in 4 years if you're willing to apply yourself well. I remember my senior year, I wallpapered my room with rejection letters from job application processes. And I'm going to come back on this theme. I think all of you, I'll say something at the end, which is you're never as good as your best win. When you're really successful, or your company or your organization or your team or you as an individual have a great performance, sometimes your head might swell. Trust me, there's a tendency with people, you're not really as good as you think you are on that way. If you're papering your wall with rejection letters, it doesn't determine who you are or how good you could be or what you're doing. So don't go too far down when you're knocked back. Be resilient. So I had my resiliency coming out of here. I wound up getting employed, though, by a Japanese steel company, Nissin Steel, who was doing a joint venture with Wheeling-Pittsburgh Steel, probably 40 miles from here. And I designed the business software systems, the order-to-cash, purchase-to-pay systems, all the way down to the production schedules that would be fed to a process computer. I did the logic flows, the screen designs, turned them over to programmers. They sent the code back to me. I tested it and put it into practice. I'm trying to do that while the plant is being built outside my window, the machine's being assembled, all the workers are being hired. So it's a race. All of us are racing not to be the bottleneck that delays the opening of this plant. So I worked 10, 12 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week for 2 years. It was a great experience. From there, I got recruited to go to New York City and work for a family-owned steel business. They were about $500 million a year. And I went to design software, just like I did at the steel company in Fallensby, West Virginia. I quickly managed the team that designed the software. I went from there to managing what's now called Business Technology Organization. And then from there, I got offered a chance to go into general management. And this was a very pivotal inflection point in my career. And I'll talk about fearlessness a little bit coming up. When you're managing your career, there's some times where something's going to be uncomfortable for you. You may be asked to do something or have an opportunity to do something. It's not what you've done before. It doesn't feel right. You think there's a lot of risk in it. Sometimes jumping through that window could be the best thing you've ever done. My task that I was being asked to do by the owners was to shut down a unionized steel facility in Long Island City, Queens, and start up a non-union facility in Pennsylvania. Move all the equipment. Now, I was a software designer. I knew the steel business pretty well because I was also responsible for integrating small tuck-in acquisitions they were doing, getting them on the same systems, the same financial systems. But this is a completely different thing. I'm going to negotiate with a union to shut down a facility. I'm going to get death threats for the first time in my life. And I didn't know that. If I'd known that, I wouldn't have taken the job. But I did get that. So I worked through that, and I did pretty well. But I was one of 2 non-family executives on the executive committee, and I was never going to be a family member. And I was relatively young. I was, roughly 30 years old, early 30s, and I felt there was more to test myself with and more in a self-actualization. So recruiters had been calling me, and I took a call from somebody recruiting for Pfizer for a head of business technology for all the infrastructure across Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. It would be based in England. I talked to my wife. We had 2 young children. We both decided, let's do it. We'll probably never do this again. The kids get older. So we moved to England, spent 4 years in England. After those 4 years, I was blessed again, and there were some people who thought I had good leadership skills. They offered me to go run a country organization in Greece. So I went out of business technology back into general management with full P&L responsibility for what was a $100 million a year business. In 4 years, we quadrupled it to $450 million in sales, mainly through finding a really good market opportunity, which was people who had high cholesterol, didn't know it was a problem. They weren't presenting to physicians and being checked. So we drove awareness campaigns through the local mayors of small villages, and Lipitor was the best-selling dyslipidemia product, so probably 200 million of that, 350 million gain was that, and we had also pushed for reimbursement of a great antibiotic called Zithromax. But Greece is an example of something I'll talk about later of what I look for, which is a definitive performance statement. I mean, if you go in and you're talking in an interview and somebody's saying, okay, you were a general manager, tell me how you drove growth. And I tell the story of taking a $100 million business to $450 million, what we found, where we unlocked the growth opportunity, how we got it, and tell that story. Somebody could say, okay, well, that'd be nice if they could replicate that in whatever challenge I have. So Greece was one of those. Pfizer wanted to test me. I'd come out of the steel industry, bit of an unknown, had this great story in Greece, but the senior folks at Pfizer are a bit risk averse and don't like to move people too quickly. Somebody said, well, maybe he got lucky. So let's send him to one of our larger, more sophisticated markets and have him launch a couple products. And let's see how he does with the whole market access strategy, getting the payers to pay for the medicines. And let's test his launch curve on a new product versus others. So I launched 5 products in 2 years in Canada, and 3 of them set the standard for the world in terms of launch uptake, which was some good fortune, but also we had a really good marketing team. So from there, I got a chance to go to Eastern Europe. I'm going to come back on this lesson, but I'll bring it up here. So, and the lesson is, you all really have to pay attention to cultivating your relationship networks and what I call your advocacy networks. Now, when I was in Greece, I was there 5 years, and I had 5 different bosses in those 5 years. And I remember I was lamenting and very upset that every year I had to train a new boss on the Greek healthcare system. I needed to be out with the doctors, the head of cardiology at University of Thessaloniki and University of Athens, going to the rural villages and educating the physicians, drawing in more patients who had high cholesterol levels. Instead, I'm in all these questions with my new boss. So I'm very upset about this. Now, you go through Canada and you roll forward. The gentleman who was president of Eastern Europe, who I used to report to when I was in Greece, he's taking a job and being promoted to run animal health. So they're going to replace that position. They're going to put somebody in that job, which was my dream job at the time. So my name is introduced in a talent management session with the head of Europe and about 8 other people. And so are about 10 other candidates for this position, all qualified. Any one of us could have done it. And my name comes up, and the gentleman who's running Canada says, I think David Simmons is a great candidate for XYZ. Look at the launch performance on these products. His leadership skills are really good. And all of a sudden, 4 other guys say, Simmons is great, Simmons is great, Simmons is great. It were the 4 of the guys that were my bosses during that time at Greece, which I was upset about because it inconvenienced me. Turned out to be this massive advocacy network at the time that probably one of the pivotal jobs of my senior executive career was coming out. So kind of in a Socratic way, if you were another one of those candidates who your boss put you forward and you could hear the crickets chirping in the background, or David Simmons, who have 4 people piling on saying how great you are, which position would you rather be in? It's kind of a rhetorical question. You'd rather be in Dave Simmons' position. You need to cultivate these advocacy networks. Okay, so I'll cut time on a future slide, but that's something I really want to walk away with you guys, because you're forged to be analytical animals. Your analytical horsepower will be pretty much unrivaled coming out of this school. With that, you may have a tendency to be introverted and solving the problem and digging for the truth. And if you do that, it's going to work well for you. You're going to come out, you're going to get a job, you'll do it better than other people, you'll be promoted without you even having to think about it. You're going to get to a level where you were cream that rose to the top of a milk bottle. It's all going to be cream. Everybody around you is good. Everybody's qualified. Who you are and what you've done is a price of entry. Then how do you move forward? And this type of thing is what you have to pay attention to. I went from there, did well in Eastern Europe. I was asked to start one of Pfizer's global businesses. We were trying to split the company into 5 pieces where each one had its own unique customer base, unique problem. So rather than try to solve all those at a CEO executive team level, Pfizer split into 5 and hired empowered general managers. I had the good fortune of getting one of the first 2, which was established products. We did well with that. I got emerging markets added on. The combined size of that was $19 billion of Pfizer's $60 billion in revenues. Our businesses did very well. I'm one of the golden children in Pfizer's succession piece. And all of a sudden I get asked to go to PPD by private equity. At first I said, there's no way. I wasn't even thinking of this. But ultimately I did go to PPD. I'll tell a little bit about that story coming up. So through that career journey, what I'd focus on is the kind of 10 lessons I'd walk away with is, if you feel that you're dealing with people who have a little more intellectual horsepower than you, you can outwork them. And if you have that mentality and you're willing to put in the work, that work ethic and your ability to work harder than the person sitting next to you will cover a lot of kind of minor differentials in terms of raw intellectual horsepower. I've seen it with myself and I see it play out in my organizations. And I'm looking for the people who, you have to be clever enough, but all of you are. Once you're that, who's going to roll up their sleeves and get into a problem with me? If the company's got an issue or has a crisis or a challenge, who's shying away from it and who's jumping in with me? That's what I want to see. And that's a key lesson. Diversity of experience is important. in your initial jobs, don't be afraid to do a variety of jobs, going out of your comfort zone. You know, your version of me running the technology group and going and dealing with a plant shutdown and a move to another place. When I say diversity of experience, I'm talking about that. You know, this advocacy network, I've spoken enough about that. It's very important. Especially as you rise through the hierarchy, don't become situational with your principals. When you get into some of these positions, and certainly CEOs of large, medium or large organizations have this, you can make a lot of decisions. And there's some check and balance from your board, some check and balance from your general counsel, there's some check and balance from your CFO. But you have a ton of power. And if you're really clever and you don't know who you are and what your principles are, you're smart enough to rationalize any decision you want to take. And I've seen a lot of people fall off the wayside by not being completely grounded in their principles. So really pay attention to this. And if you want to know what's a good, simple principle set to at least consider as a framework to guide yourself, if you haven't done so, read Atlas Shrugged. It's a great guidance if you're going into business. Really, what is the fundamental way to do business? It's a very, very good philosophical base that can help guide you. The willingness to take career risk, I talked about that, it's very important. This challenging assignment piece, there will be periods where you will have an opportunity or be asked to do something that's going to make you feel very uncomfortable. When you do that, think it through, really think through the implications, but I would say if you ask yourself the question of, if I do that, is what's making me feel uncomfortable the fact that I will have to master a skill that I don't yet know, therefore there's a risk of failure? If that's what's making you uncomfortable, jump on that opportunity and do it. If the opportunity you're resisting, you don't feel uncomfortable because you think the leader is unethical, something in that frame, okay, don't do it. But learn to discern this level of discomfort, because in that, if you embrace it, that could be some of your most meaningful inflection points in your career progression. Number 8, I get some controversy on this, but for me it's been very foundational in my competency level, as much as problem-solving skills and analysis skills where they came out of Carnegie. Living abroad for more than a decade, immersed in different cultures, broadens your lens of the way you see the world in a way that's fundamental. And it's very valuable when you try to unlock the perspectives, talents, and experiences of a diverse team, especially if you're a CEO or a senior leadership team level. If you're dealing with people and you expect them to completely conform to your paradigm and everything else is equal and you're facing me and my team, I'll beat you. Because I'll be able to pull more out of my team just because I can simply go into the zone of the people that are sitting around the table better than you'll be able to. So this living and working abroad is important. Visiting, you can get a little bit out of it, and people have challenged me. You know, I've spent some time, I did this project assignment in such and such country. Living for multiple years and having to learn to check your paradigm at the door is priceless. Understanding the role of subconscious bias is critical, especially if you're, for lack of a better term in the US, if you're not a white male who's predominant in the power construct. If you're not of that, you really have to understand that the person that's making a lot of the job hiring decisions for these senior roles have a bias. And a lot of it's subconscious. They don't even know they have it. The more you can understand that subconscious bias exists and understand what it is, you can take the game to that person in terms of a job selection process. This doesn't mean don't be yourself. You have to be genuine and true to yourself. But you have to understand what the subconscious bias is to do well with it. If we have time, I'll give an example of what this looks like. And really, I've found that I've gone to jobs, and I didn't have a lot of thought about my career progress in the beginning, but I did jobs that I thought I would enjoy, that I would learn and grow. And what I'm finding and what I'm seeing in other people and myself, when people match what they're good at with what the challenge is in an individual job, they tend to be happy and they tend to do great work. As opposed to people who go and do something because they think, I should do that because it's a pathway to something that doesn't really fit what they're good at nor what they're passionate about. Those people generally don't perform as well as the cohort that match themselves into the challenge as well. So kind of think about, in essence, when you have an experience or a job and you enjoy it a lot, dig deep about why. Is it because you like to solve puzzles? Are you competitive? Do you like to help other people grow? I mean, really get and discern what are your motivational drivers, and then put yourself in position to attack those, and things will go in a good direction. So now I'll talk about, if you're coming in and interviewing with me, what am I looking for generally in people coming in? The first kind of 5 elements I have up there are what I call table stakes. I mean, any candidate coming in, if they don't get a tick on these items, then I don't care if I don't have any other candidates. I'll start the search over and go out until I do find the right slate of candidates. The next set of stuff will be, okay, people who get through those table stakes, where do I see them differentiating? Where I would take any of the candidates, but if they're differentiated, how do I discern that? So the first is hard work. I mentioned that if somebody's not willing to come in and roll up their sleeves and put in the time, then I don't want them on my senior leadership team. These companies and today's business challenges are too complex to have somebody who doesn't want to put in the hard work and effort. Second, somebody's got to be able to both lead a team and work as a part of a team and know the difference. So even as a CEO, there's some kind of task force within our company that are topical in nature. I'll go into as a team member, somebody else will be leading. I could dominate the room if I wanted to. I have to learn to check myself, bring the content that I'm bringing, which is knowledge of the customer in PPD's case, and bring that to that task force. So it's important to see somebody who's beyond just an individual contribution, but somebody who can thrive and grow and contribute in a team environment. Resilience is important. I mentioned, when I graduated here, I wallpapered my room with rejection letters for job offers. I didn't let that determine or define how I felt about myself or my willingness to pick myself up. Obviously, I made the right decision not over-interpreting those rejection letters. The point is, whenever any of you go out and you go through your career, you're going to get some stuff right and you're going to get kicked in the teeth periodically. It's going to be nothing you did, things changed in the environment, something you didn't anticipate took over your industry or your division, and you're going to get knocked back. You're going to fail. It could be your own poor judgment. Don't learn from those, but be resilient enough to step up and get back in the game. And don't, again, stay true to your principles. Don't overreact and get out of control trying to overcome something because you feel there's some knock in your self-worth through the failure. These are all learning processes. Make sure you stay true to that. But people who haven't shown resilience or don't have a good failure story in their background, I have a big question mark of them when they come in and talk to me. Integrity is clear, and accountability, though, I'll spend some time on. What I'm looking for in accountability at senior roles is, I have an organization, we try to define as well as possible scope of roles and responsibilities across the leadership team. But things happen in our environment, competitors do something, customers do something, regulators do something, and the issue kind of falls through the cracks. It's not clearly in anybody's remit. It could be in one, could be in the other. And you have some people who say, well, that's not really my job, that's a really ugly, nasty thing. I think that's Joe's job over there. And, Joe may be saying, well, it's not really mine, it's Nancy's job over here. I want people who kind of step up and say, no matter where I'm concerned about the enterprise. This thing is ugly and nasty. If I'm the first one to spot it, I'm grabbing it, I'm wrestling it to the ground, I'm bringing it forward to the leadership team, talking about what the issue is and how I think we ought to progress it. When I say accountability, that's taking accountability. It's easy for somebody to say, yes, I'm responsible and accountable for my job as it's narrowly defined. Leaders can live in this nebulous space and tackle things and solve them, and those leaders tend to have a better work product in the end. So now the things that differentiate, these are beyond the table stake side, are something extra. I call it a definitive performance statement. So for me, it was Greece was an example, from 100 million to 450 in 4 years, faster than any other European country at Pfizer. That's definitive, it stands out. The case of when I ran established products, that business was shrinking 25% a year for 4 consecutive years. We got it over 2 years to flat and even got 1 percentage point of growth in its 3rd year. That's a definitive performance statement. It changed the inflection and the trend of a business and turns it around. I'm giving very easy ones that are revenue and profit generated. It doesn't have to be. It could be a technical discipline. It could be an innovation in a process. But those definitive performance statements make candidates stand out. Passion and creating colleague engagement. Now this is targeting senior roles where I'm hiring people who are running large organizations. the fundamental question here is, why would somebody follow that person? And the people following them, would they give discretionary effort? Meaning beyond what they're being asked to do, would they give more? And to the extent that I believe somebody will lead a group and unlock this discretionary effort, those people I'd hire more quickly than somebody that was mediocre on that front. Innovation, adaptation, and risk-taking, this is what I call fearlessness. People who will try to do something different, knowing that sometimes it won't work, but that's much more powerful to me than somebody who seeks a perfection standard and never does anything for fear that they could be wrong. Courage is pretty self-explanatory. Personal humility, I'll tie into that creating colleague engagement. And what I've found is people who are, while people will act in their own self-interest, which I think they should do, because you shouldn't expect somebody else to take care of your happiness, you have to do it yourself. People still, in pursuit of their own self-interest, do so in a way that's trying to help drive the enterprise forward. They do it in a way which shows humility, which shows empathy and sympathy for other parties. And when you have a leader who has a good track record of success, has a lot of trust and confidence in the organization, who is packaged with humility, I tend to see a correlation with that experientially with discretionary effort and colleague engagement rising. So that personal humility piece, as opposed to somebody who's very full of themselves and very arrogant, I tend to see a reverse correlation of discretionary effort for people working for them, because they generally think, okay, well, I'm not sure that person's really going to be there for me. They're out for themselves. And always, I do measure for senior roles, the person coming in, what's the quality of talent of the team that person's built underneath them? And you get it's a good surrogate marker for a lot of these things. If that team's just a dynamite team, then one could say, all right, well, this is a pretty good leader, let's bring them in. So again, if you were coming in and interviewing with me, if you got through those table stakes and differentiated on some or a lot of these criteria, you have a pretty good chance of getting through. So now I'll try to switch and go into this case study. So now imagine that you're working, you have a great job, you're a senior executive, things are going great for you, and you get an opportunity that comes in out of left field. How did I deal with that same situation? And maybe this will give you a framework you could leverage. So I was contracted by Heidrick & Struggles, which is one of the large search firms, in late 2011. And the gentleman said, this is for a CEO job. We know who you are. We know what you do at Pfizer. The private equity owners want to talk to you. They've taken this company private. They're going to replace the founder and CEO. They want you to come in and consider the job. It's a $2 billion services business. And I said, no, I'm not interested. I'm a Pfizer, everything's good. Services business, I'm a product guy. It was really narrow thinking that I challenged a little bit later. Later I did go into the mix though, and it was mainly to, at a minimum, even if I didn't take the job or I wasn't selected as the right person, I could expand my network of relationships into private equity with guys that were good relationships, networks for me to have. And second, I'd learn a little bit more about the clinical research industry segment, because I was primarily on the marketing sales side within Pfizer. So you had this new private equity owners, it was a services business. It would require family upheaval. Remember, I'd moved my two young kids from New York City to UK, had a third child, moved all of them from, and my wife stayed with me, to Greece. Had a fourth child, my wife stayed with me. We moved all of them to Canada, and it was so cold we didn't procreate anymore. And then we moved back to New York City, and then we moved, this was going to be to North Carolina. We had kind of thought, okay, in Pfizer, all roads lead to Rome. I was back in the New York City area, lived in Connecticut, a wonderful life, been there 5 years. I'm going to take my high school son, who's sitting in the back row, to North Carolina. He's doing very well at New Canaan High School. I'm going to disrupt him and move him. My wife was saying, you're not going to disrupt him and move him. And so we had to work through all these family issues. This turned out to be a big thing. And the financial implications were interesting, because the sell to me from Heidrick and the private equity guys were, when we IPO this thing, you can make a ton of money. So their primary sell turned out to be my fifth level consideration. And I think this is probably an important part to walk away with. Don't let other people dictate to you what your decision framework is. You decide and you set your decision framework. Or else you chase something that in the end isn't really linked to your own happiness. So what would you do in this circumstance? Here's what I did. I set a framework for considering a role outside Pfizer. So move this role aside. If I was going to leave Pfizer, what would it have to be? What would it take to take me out so I can kind of distance or compartmentalize this specific opportunity? One, it needed to be a CEO role. There was a big self-actualization drive for me. So I was driving, I thought if I continued to be successful, I had a good shot. It's probably me or this other guy who would ultimately be the successor for the current Pfizer CEO. And so I wanted to do that. So one would be, it'd have to be a CEO role. I wouldn't leave for any other reason. Second, it needed to be a company or enterprise big enough that it had scale, but small enough that it had good growth potential. Because one of the things that nagged me at Pfizer was we were at this stage, we were so big, we were constantly attacking our cost structure. And we were downsizing and transforming the company. And it was one of those things that didn't give me a lot of satisfaction and happiness year after year for 5 years to consider I was going to be downsizing and dealing with the cost structure of that business. So if this was something that, again, motivated and satisfied me, I'd consider it. I didn't want a turnaround. While I have had to do a turnaround, I don't like it. It doesn't suit me as well as it does taking a company and changing the growth trajectory of it. Something that's got a good substrate of capabilities, and I have to go and diagnose, see untapped market segments, direct it, complement it a bit, and move. That more fits me, it's more what I like and I'm satisfied with. So again, do what you love. Stay away from maybe what you're not suited for. So that was my framework. When Hydric came in, you had to work through a services business. Basically, this was big enough for scale, small enough to grow. It was a CEO role. It had a lot of good stuff around it. So then I set a three-tier decision tree. One was, okay, here's a job I would consider. Do I take this job or do I stay and compete for the Pfizer role, which my calculus was it'd be 4 to 5 years before the CEO may depart. Second consideration was impact on family. This turned out to be number one on the decision tree, family yes or no, when my wife and kids and Jonathan said, yeah, I'll go. If this is the right thing to do, I'll tackle the transition to a new school. My wife said, yeah, I'll do it. We got through that one. And the third one was this the best opportunity available. So the first one was, okay, will my family do it? Yes. Would I leave this or compete at Pfizer? Okay, I'll leave for this rather than compete at Pfizer. Then the third was, okay, if I'm going to do that, how do I know something better is not coming around the door 6 months from now? All right, so that was the framework. So how did I walk through that? So first, this thing hit all the right spots for me. I talked about that. In the end, we thought we were taking a step back on family impact. In the end, it turned out to be very positive for the family. I mean, we live by the beach. I live on a golf course and I like to golf. It's 15 minutes drive into work instead of an hour and a half train ride into New York City. I mean, the children's education was a concern. That's turned out to go very, very well. So that turned out well. Now, the one thing I would put in is, again, this is, sweat a question hard. So one, that question of how do I know something better wouldn't come around the corner? I mean, how do you answer that question? And I had a decision team, which I'll talk about. Two of the members of this team were two friends who were partners at McKinsey, our partners at McKinsey. And I said, I'm really struggling with that. I think I just got to do it because I don't know if something better will come out. And they said, no, we think we have a framework that could help. So they went and analyzed every CEO placement in life sciences over the last 2 years. And why 2 years? They said, okay, well, you said, they asked me a question. If the CEO of Pfizer role was coming up now or in the next 2 years, would you stay and fight for it or would you leave? I said, yeah, I might stay. If I knew it was going to be 2 years, I might stay. He said, all right, so let's look back over the last 2 years and see what happened. 36 CEO placements in life sciences. And these were all companies with a revenue stream because I didn't want to look at a startup biotech with no revenue stream. And of that, 24 were leaders in the organization moving up, which is typical. 12 were outsiders going in. So there's a cohort of 12 over a 2-year period of jobs that look like this one. Of that, no one under the age of 55 ran anything larger than $3 billion in sales. And of that 12-person cohort, 8 were current CEOs who were moving into larger jobs. So the me in this there were 4 opportunities that happened in a 2-year period. The one I was looking at was the best one of the cohort of 4 that happened before. So, I mean, it's an interesting story, but the point is, I was ready to walk away from that question, and my friends helped me sweat it to give me a pretty good, comfortable view that something equivalent could come along, but likely nothing better. You never know, but the data would suggest that nothing would come along. So, again, a good Carnegie mechanism, sweat this, sweat it, until you get an answer. So I had a decision support team, and at this senior level, I highly recommend this. It's hard to deal with all this yourself. Your psychology is caught up in this process. You want the other side to love you and pick you as the candidate. Once they do that, it kind of validates that you think you want the job. You really need some people to put some checks and balances on this. So I had an agent. I called him my agent, paid for him out of my own pocket, and this is a good, trusted friend. I had him for 3 months. He screened every private equity guy I was interviewing, gave me the whole background on their careers, what they were focused on, what their interests were. We did mock interviews on what they thought they were going to be probing, what my selling proposition was. I had an attorney who specialized in private equity employment contracts. This lady turned out to be priceless. And if anybody goes through this, I have a good reference for you. I had the 2 McKinsey consulting partners who all I had to do was pay for the beers. We'd meet. I did give a leap of faith that they could keep this confidential because they were connected inside Pfizer. And that was a leap of faith on my part. Never a leak during the whole time I was there. So that turned out to be a good decision. And Larry Bossidy was my mentor. So I talk about relationship networks. Larry Bossidy is somebody I'd met through a divisional president networking group. I liked him. He liked my style. Every 2 or 3 months, we'd have half-hour calls where I'd tell him what I was dealing with, and he'd be a sounding board. And I'll tell you how that played out with this. I was really sweating the decision, had all this family impact. I called Larry. I said, Larry, I want to get your advice. I want to tell you how I'm looking at this. You tell me what you think. So we went through this, and I walked through my whole decision process, all the analysis, even what the McKinsey guys had done. And he just, I won't use the exact words he said since we're being filmed, but he said, just make the decision. Because God, would you stop already? And I mean, it sounds funny, but anybody else telling me that, I would have rejected it. But you have a guy who was a legendary CEO. Immediately I said, okay, I've analyzed this enough. Time to make a decision and move on. So the point is that this idea of getting some friends around you to help you is very valuable. So my final thoughts, I think we'll only have about 5 or 10 minutes for question and answer, is find role models, mentors, advocacy networks, and work those hard. Work at this, especially if it's not if your natural tendency is more introverted. You can't change who you are. You will be that way. Intellectualize it and systematically set out to cultivate this type of network and work it hard and build it. Accept what you can't control. You guys already won 99% of the battle you're in this room. Okay, there's a lot of people less fortunate in the world that'll never see a taste of this, who probably have capabilities equal to or better than ours. You can't control that. You're here. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Second is this right place, right time, wrong place, wrong time. This is when you win, don't let it go to your head. Show humility, be humble, reflect on it, learn from it. When you lose, don't overdo the loss. Doesn't mean you're any less or any worse than you were the day before when you got up out of bed. So really watch those things, especially as you get into leadership roles. Everybody's going to tell you how great you are. And if you really want to be fed that way, if your psychology is that fragile, you'll get all that reinforcement you want, but you'll be blind and you're likely going to derail. So make sure you know yourself and test yourself on this. And systems that are rigged against you. And this subconscious bias piece is what I'm talking about. You really have to discern what's the decision framework, both explicit, implicit, and subconscious that's going on a decision process, and adapt your strategy for winning a job into that. And intellectual curiosity will serve you well. If I had 5 people and they were all equal on everything else, and one stood out in terms of their insatiable quest for understanding, that's the person I'd go with, because those people tend to ask questions, poke on things, probe on things that ultimately unlock value for an enterprise. So with that, I'll end and give a little bit of time for questions. Okay.
Hi, my name is Chuma, first year at Tepper. As an outsider coming into PPD in the CEO role, what kind of strategies did you use to engender trust and build credibility with the leadership team there?
Okay, that's a great question. first, I follow, and if anybody likes to read books, there's a book called The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. And anybody that's going through a leadership transition ought to read this book because it's a good systematic blueprint to guide yourself through a transition period. So the first thing I did was I assessed the situation of the company, which fall into 4 kind of classifications: turnaround, startup, realignment, or sustaining for success. I assessed it as a realignment. Good fundamental business. The due diligence from Carlisle played that out. Needed some tweaks, particularly on the selling front, so I had a thesis going in. So the right strategy for a leadership transition on that front is first do no harm. It's kind of a corporate Hippocratic oath. First do no harm. So no matter, I'm impatient. Guard against that impatience. Don't make decisions too quickly. Don't make them rash. Get in, deeply learn, and evaluate. Make something pull you off the mark to really get too aggressive in your decision-making front. So the way I had credibility going in, I was the customer, and I was a manifestation of the customer from one of the largest biopharmaceutical companies in Pfizer. The whole organization wanted to see the world through my eyes. So there was a thirst for, what are you guys looking for? What's going on inside these companies? How are they making decisions? Why is procurement becoming more powerful? So just engaging in that thirst of what they wanted drew me closer to the organization, gave me some credibility. Second, there were a couple personnel moves that I made pretty rapidly, where it was pretty clear that talent could be upgraded. And then third was setting what I call the defining strategic statement on the realignment, which was building what I called a strategic selling capability. In other words, how to get into large biopharma, gain deep insights, build relationship networks, and proactively bring selling propositions to them to help solve their problems, as opposed to wait for that company to decide they want to do a clinical trial, send an RFP for a development project, bid against it, and win the bid, which we have to do, and we have to do it well. But that's kind of a reactive model where kind of build a good business and it'll come to you. I don't think that sustains over time. We have to go get it. So making that statement, selling the organization, walking them through why, built the credibility too.
So unfortunately, we're just out of time at this point, but do you want to join me in thanking David Simmons for coming today?
Thank you.